We are on Daf Hey, page 5A, and we've been learning this Agadata Gemara homiletic insights, and we're going to take a minute or two to go over the previous Gemara that we didn't review yet. So the Gemara before, um, I should say the Mishnah. The Mishnah was mentioned about the end date of asking for rain. That means that when we say the Saint Talmud, when is the end? When do you stop saying Saint Talmud? And we have in this Mishnah, we have two opinions. And as we, if you recall, these are not the only two opinions. We did have an opinion in the Mishnah on page 2. That was the first Mishnah about B'yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, that it mentioned over there at the end of it, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that the first day of Pesach, the Rishon, the one who says, the one who daven Shachris, he is the one who he mentions the Mashav Ruach, the rain, but the one who davens Musaf doesn't. The Gemara had discussions about it. Possible to say that is the same date for the Saint Talmud. Now it's a little confusing, but there is such an idea that at least that's the same end date for sure. So that opinion, Rabbi Yehuda would hold, that maybe the Saint Talmud would be the same, because logically it wouldn't make sense to continue asking for rain later. So the Gemara concluded earlier that these two opinions do not, even though they're both Rabbi Yehuda's, but they're not the same Rabbi Yehuda. So the Mishnah on page 5 that we learned yesterday mentioned the end date for asking for rain, and we have a Rabbi Yehuda here who is a different. It's a different opinion that we think, or that some think Rabbi Yehuda held of, that it's Ad Sheyavar Pesach till the end of Pesach. I mean, he would continue asking for rain until the end of Pesach. Reb Meir said until the end of Nisan, and he even brought a verse which showed that it rained in Nisan. That means Nisan is the rainy season. The Gemara also that we learned yesterday mentioned that the verse seems problematic, because the verse says that Yoira was in Nisan. Yoira is the first rain, and that doesn't seem to fit with what we know that the Yoira, the rain of Yoira is supposed to be, especially if you know agriculture, but also from the teachings that we have, we know Yoira is supposed to be in this month that we are in now, Marcheshvan. And we have a brisa like that, or Mishnah that says, a brisa that says Yoira Marcheshvan, Malkush is in Nisan, so it doesn't even say it in a brisa. But everyone in Israel knows also, if you know agriculture, that the rains, it's supposed to start, it needs to rain during the rainy season. So what does the verse mean? The Gemara is bothered with how can you translate that verse? What does the verse mean that it rained, the first rain? And the Gemara explains that's talking about the story in Yoel's time of the famine, and there was a plague of locusts, there was a famine, and there were 7 years of it, and also at the end of the famine, Hashem told Yoel to tell the Jewish people they should plant. Of course, that was the last thing on their mind, to go plant. They hardly had food to eat, as we see in this whole story, that they were eating their own flesh even. And the story, it goes through the whole story, how the first year what they ate, the second year, finally, the last year they actually had the rain come. The first rains came in the month of Nisan, and what day in Nisan. This what happened was it rained on the first of Nisan, and the prophet told the Yidden that they should go plant, go sow, and they were like, "What? We hardly have food." He said the prophet told them, "Nevertheless, you should sow, you should plant." And so a miracle happened to them that they ended up finding some extra stuff to eat. Interesting. It says, what did they find? They found stuff in the walls and in the ant holes. So the Rashi tells us, what do they find in the walls? So Rashi adds in that the mice gathered. So they got grain that the mice gathered, and they got grain that the ants gathered, and that's what. So they had extra to eat anyway. Bottom line is that they planted. This miracle happened. They had a little to eat, and they planted on the second day, the third day, and the fourth day of Nisan, and they ended up bringing the Yomer on the 16th of Nisan, which is the right day to bring the Yomer, the day after the Seder. Now, the day after the first day of Pesach, I should say. So the Gemara says that a big miracle that the grain grew in 11 days. How did it grow in 11 days? What does it mean that it grew in 11 days? So Taisvus is bothered with this. Well, what day did it start growing? They brought the Omer on the 16th. That means it was ready to be. They harvested it on the 16th of Nisan, and it grew in 11 days. The Gemara says, what were the 11 days? What day did it start growing? I'm hearing some noise, but no answer.
Rabbi?
It's something.
Rabbi?
I'm muting everyone. You can unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I just have a question. If they were told that they could find grain in ant holes and in where there's mice who gathered,
they were not told that. They did find it. They weren't told that. A miracle happened.
They found it. I mean, I know there's a nace. I know there's a nace behind all this, but isn't where there's mice, there's mice feces, and wouldn't there be feces in the grain? I mean, and urine from the mice. I mean, I know this sounds majnun, but I'm trying to figure out how they would be able to eat that before Pesach. I mean, if that's really if they were able to gather, if this was a gathering process by rodents and vermin, you know what I'm saying? It's
what did they do for Pesach? It's very interesting that you bring up that question, because regarding Hilchos Pesach, there is a question of if you have grain that mice ate from. In the laws of Pesach, it deals with, is it chametz because the saliva? So it doesn't deal with the urine or the feces, but it deals with the saliva from the mice could make it chametz. And
I mean, it almost seems like
so because you're connecting the fact that this is right before Pesach, so you're wondering. Look, it would seem like there's this is problematic. What they're eating on Pesach, right? The mice that the grain that the mice chewed into, and then there's a question: the saliva of the mice maybe would make it chametz. So in Shulchan Aruch it says it's not a problem because the flour that you're getting from the mice, whatever became chametz, was is batal beroiv. It's batal before Pesach or batal b'shishim. It's considered nullified in the majority. That's not going to be chametz, and so if you have grain that some of that mice ate from it, it would be batal. But the question on Shulchan Aruch is, what about for shmura matzah? What about for the Seder? For the Seder, would you be allowed to have, from grain, that matzah for the Seder is supposed to be shamor, it's supposed to be guarded from chametz. So for that mitzvah, the matzah of mitzvah of the Seder, that would seemingly not be good enough if the mice ate from it. But I don't think it's a question over here. That's a question in Shulchan Aruch, like what would be the halacha with the shmura matzah? That's talked about. There are discussions about it. It seems that maybe it does need to be shmura matzah. Like you can't use that for the shmura matzah. But here we're dealing with a situation where they had no food, so whether maybe they didn't have a seder. I don't know what type of seder they had. They had no food, so they didn't have matzah. They didn't have the matzah mitzvah. It seems like, but anyway, bottom line is, if Hashem made a miracle for them that they found this grain, He made a miracle that it didn't get wet or it didn't have the urine or the whatever it is. Nothing. Obviously it was edible to some extent, so they were able to eat it. If you look through what the other things they ate, this was no big deal. So in any event, they planted on the second day, the third day, and the fourth day, and the Gemara says that it grew in 11 days. Now, what day did it grow? So let's say it started growing on the 5th. 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and then the 15th would be 11 days. So it grew from the 5th, it seems like. Now, why would it grow on the 5th? They planted it on the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. Why did it only start growing on the 5th? In other words, the Gemara says that it grew in 11 days. It seems if you look at the calculation of the Gemara, some of it grew in maybe from the second day to the 16th, maybe 14 days, maybe 13 days. That's the stuff that was planted on the third day, on the fourth day. So it doesn't seem like it grew in 11 days. It grew in more because they planted it on the second, third, and fourth. So why does it say 11 days? Anyone?
Because they planted it from the 1st to the 5th. It rained on the 5th, and on the 6th it started growing, and 11 days is the 16th of the month.
So it started growing when it rained first.
Yes.
So it all boils down to the rain. The fact that they planted it a few days earlier doesn't do anything. It all boils down to the rain. Now, that sounds very good. I like that answer, Ruvain, except for one problem. And what is that problem? The problem is that the Gemara explains that what is haloich yelech uvachoy? It goes and cries, noisei meshach hazora, carrying the container of seeds. So the Gemara explains that the ox would plow while it was crying. It was walking along and plowing and crying. And when it came back, what happened? It started chewing on what it planted already. So it sounds like it started growing already on the second day when they planted. It was already started growing. And if it already started growing on the second day, it comes out that it grew from the second day all the way till the 16th. It's much more than 11 days.
Much more.
I mean, it's a few extra days. So, in other words, your answer fits if we don't know anything about it starting to grow right away. But once we know that it started growing right away, because it says that the ox, when it was plowing on one direction, when it returned, when it came back, it started eating already from the little that sprouted, from the little sprouts. That means that it already was growing on the same day that it was that it was planted, and that's what it means. Boy yavai berina, that it came back and I was rejoicing while it was coming back, returning from its plowing. It was rejoicing. So that's the question that Tosfos asks over here. Tosfos is bothered with it, and he's and it's interesting because Tosfos uses the heading of Tosfos. The title is the fact that the animals, when they would return, they would chew from the sprouts. Why does Tosfos use that as his heading? Because that is the source of the problem. If not for that, you could explain like Ruvain just told us, and you could explain that the grain didn't grow until it rained. But since you see that it grew from the beginning, right when it was planted, so then you don't really have 11 days. So Tosfos answers this question by saying that you have to say that that it at least some of it grew in 11 days, maybe not all of it. It's not a perfect answer. Tosfos ends off tzarich iyun. It needs to be looked into. And one of the problems that Tosfos has is it sounds like they brought the grain from the 11-day. They brought the omer from the grain that grew in 11 days. But how do they know they brought it from that? Maybe they brought it from the stuff that grew in 12 or 13 days. In other words, some of it grew in 11 days. The stuff they planted on the fourth day, you could say grew in 11 days because it was planted on the fourth day. We don't count the fourth. Why don't we count the fourth? Because it's not a full day. So you could say it grew in 11 days because you count from the 5th, and it finished growing on the 15th, and then they used it for the Omer that they harvested the night of the 16th. So it grew in 11 days. From the 5th, if you count from 5 to 15, that's 11, and that's 5 to 15. So some of it grew in 11 days. But how do we know really that the Omer was brought from the grain that grew in 11 days? Maybe it was brought from the stuff that was planted on the 3rd day, not on the 4th day. And the stuff that was planted on the 3rd day grew in 12 days. And the stuff that was planted on the 2nd day of Nisan grew in 13 days. So that's the way Tosfos is still bothered, but he says that's what it seems like. The Gemara is understanding that some of it grew in 11 days, but it's just the wording itself. Tosfos is bothered with. Okay, so in any event, the Gemara mentions this that the people were crying Zorim Bedima, Berina Yitzchok. When they planted, they were crying. Why were they crying? When they planted, they hardly had food to eat, and they're going and planting. But miraculously, Berina Yitzchok, with rejoicing, they rejoiced when they harvested because it grew and so fast. It was such a miraculous thing. And yesterday we spoke a little about bringing the Omer from miraculous grain. That was a little discussion we had. How can you do a mitzvah with stuff that's grown by a miracle? Stuff that's grown by a miracle, you can't really consider that the mitzvah. Generally, mitzvahs are done with things that are made physically in the physical world. We brought an example and the story of the Alter Rebbe doing Kiddush Levana and stopping the boat, and we explained that here. We also talked about Hanukkah a little. How could they light the menorah with oil of a miracle? But we explained over here that the grain was real grain. It happened to grow fast, but it wasn't miraculously created grain. It was grain that grew. It grew in a miraculous way, but the grain itself was a natural growth. And so therefore it wasn't grain created by a miracle. It was grain that grew, and it was the time frame was miraculous, but the growth was the natural growth, and therefore it wasn't problematic of bringing the Omer from such grain. Then the Gemara we struggled to understand this Gemara with B'kirbecha Kadosh v'lo avay ba'ir. Hashem says, that I cannot enter my heavenly Jerusalem until I enter the Jerusalem below, the earthly Jerusalem. And the idea, we understand, means that Hashem really wants the Beis Hamikdash below to be built up, and then Hashem could be relaxed, so to speak, or feel comfortable, be able to rejoice. But until the Jerusalem below is built, it's not, Hashem doesn't have comfort. And the Gemara does prove that there are two Jerusalems. There's Jerusalem below, Jerusalem above. It's an interesting verse. It says, Ki'ir shechubra layachta, a city which is joined together with it. So we mentioned also about the idea that there is a Beis Hamikdash that's going to be that's in heaven already. It's already built. There's discussion as who's supposed to build the Beis Hamikdash, and there's contradictions about it. So one of the to reconcile the contradictions about who's building the Beis Hamikdash, we said that the Beis Hamikdash is built already in heaven, but there's a small little addition that needs to be added: the door, the locks. So that maybe will be will be according to that's the other statement, that it says Mashiach will build the Beis Hamikdash, or the Bnei Yisrael will build it. So that would be down, that would be the final touch. But really, the Beis Hamikdash is built in Shamayim. So that would be the two cities. Maybe that's the meaning of this Gemara about the Yerushalayim above, Yerushalayim below. Then we touched on this other complicated verse, a verse in the book of Jeremiah, the book of Yirmiyahu, where it says over there, "Ba'achas yivaru v'yichsalu musar havolim etzu." This pasuk that says that they are foolish and bar, like boars, and they rebuke. Basically, they don't accept rebuke, a rebuke of vanities. Each one is wooden, and so the Gemara explains that the meaning of this pasuk is that it's one sin that, in translating the words differently, Yavaru means burned. That the one sin that will cause the wicked, the Rishayim, to burn in heaven, or hell, I should say, will burn in Gehenna, in hell. And what sin is that causes, which sounds like one of the most painful punishments, comes from idol worship. That's what it seems like the Gemara is emphasizing with this verse. The Gemara is explaining the verse to mean that there's one that causes be'er, that causes a fire, that the fire of Gehenna, fire of hell, burns them, and that is the sin of Avodah Zarah. Maybe it's worse than other punishments of Gehenna. I'm not so familiar with all the different punishments in Gehenna, but there is Gehenna shel sheleg, there is a Gehenna of snow, and there's Gehenna of fire. Our Gemara is emphasizing that, or explaining the verse to mean that the sin of idol worship seems to bring out that the fire of Gehenna is going to consume those that worship idols. And we brought a source that Hevel is idol worship. Hevel is the famous word that's used in Koheles. Hevel havolim amar Koheles hakol havel. Everything is vain. There's nothing. The whole physical world is which people put their whole life into, and it's all Hevel. It's for nothing and insignificant. And so that's the word Hevel here refers to. It's used as a reference for idol worship. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to continue with these statements where Rav Nachman asks Rav Yitzchok questions, and Rav Yitzchok answers with teachings from Rav Yochanan. And we are on page 5a, and we're at the bottom of the page, 2 lines up from the bottom of the page. If you have the art scroll, it is on page 5a3. Otherwise, it's just 5a, and it's 2 lines up from the bottom of the page. So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchok, Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchok, "My dechsiv, what does it mean in this pasuk Kishtayim rois asa ami. There are two bad things that my nation did. Where is this pasuk? In Yirmiyah chapter 2, Jeremiah. Two bad things, asa ami. Oisi Ozvu, they left me. Though I'm just going to read for you the verse. Oisi Ozvu, they left me. They forsaken me. Makar mayim chayim, the source of living water. Lachtzov bahem boiros nishbarim, to carve out for them, to dig out for them cisterns that are broken. Asher lo yochilu hamayim, that will not contain water. In other words, there's cracks or holes in these cisterns, and they're not going to hold the water. So what is that verse? Again, these are poetic verses that the Gemara expounds upon. And what exactly is it? Two bad things that the people did to me. What are the two bad things that people did to Hashem? And the verse explains that they left me, and I am the source of living water. And they built themselves bayros. It's interesting. It uses the word twice. Two cisterns, or cisterns that are broken, or cisterns that are broken, and that cannot contain the water, cannot hold water. So the Gemara continues and gives an answer to this. What does this mean? But first, the Gemara asks it as a question. What's very complicated here is that it wasn't only two sins. The Jewish people did numerous sins. So the Gemara says, Shtayim rois asa ami, and the Gemara asks, Tartin hu tahavu? It was two. Esrin v'arba shvika lahu. They left 24. They forsaked. They transgressed 24 sins. And Rashi says in the book of Yechezkel, it mentions 24 sins. But another explanation is that they transgressed the 24 books of the Tanakh. So it's not saying 24 specific sins. Again, if you the first explanation would be that the verse says they did two sins, and the question is, what do you mean two? It's calculated, all the 24. They probably stole, and they probably murdered, they probably committed adultery, and they probably did other whatever it says over there in chapter 22 of Ezekiel. It mentions the sins, but the other in the other interpretation, the other explanation of Rashi is that they transgressed two. They transgressed 24 books of Moses, 24 books of the Tanakh. The 24 books include the books of the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the books of the Ksuvim, the writings. So all 24. If you add it all up, the Chumash has 5 books. The Nevi'im, has 11 or 12, and the Ksuvim ultimately altogether equals 24. And the way they calculate it is Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Beis is considered one book. Malachim Aleph and Malachim Beis, Kings 1 and 2 is all considered one, and ultimately it equals 24. So there's 24 books of the Tanakh. So Gemara says they transgressed 2, they transgressed 24. So Amar Lei Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Reb Yitzchok answers Reb Nachman again with the same thing. I have a teaching from an answer from Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said about this. We're on page, we turn the page now, 5b. We just turned the page for those that don't know where we are. 5b, the top of the page. There's one sin that is equal to 2. And what is that? My nihu avodah zara. The sin that the Jewish people did was double as bad as when the Goyim sinned with idol worship. Why is it double? Why would a sin of idol worship be worse for Yidden than for Goyim? Because the understanding is that not only did they not serve Hashem, but they also worshiped an idol. In other words, it's equal. It's considered 2. We know about Hashem. and we are forsaking Hashem, and we are worshiping an idol. The Gemara explains. As it says, there are two sins that my nation did, two evils that my nation did. They forsaken me, and I am the source of living waters. And to dig out for them cisterns that are broken cisterns. So they sinned by not worshiping Hashem. And as it explains, when it says about it says in them, ki ivru iye kitiyim uru, for go to the islands of the Kitiyim and see, v'kedar shilchu v'esbainamoid, and go and hisbainanu, meditate, think about, understand about the Kitiyim, about this other nation. Kedar, go to the Isles of Kitiyim and see, and go to Kedar and understand a lot. Has a nation changed their gods? And they don't even have gods. And have they changed? In other words, you have me, and you switched me for an idol. Did the other nations switch their gods? And they are not even gods, and they don't switch them. And my nation changed its glory for something that has no benefit, has no help. There's no, doesn't benefit them at all. Tana. We learned in it was taught by a Tana, where we learned that Kutiyim oivdim la'aish. That Kutiyim, they worship the fire. The Kedarim and the people of Kedar, another nation, the Kutiyim oivdim la'aish. The Kutiyim worship fire. The Kedarim oivdim l'mayim, and the Kedarim worship water. And even though they know who's stronger, so if you have the worshiping, you have a choice what to worship. These nations, two nations, one nation worshipped fire, the other nation worshipped water. Which one sounds like they're more right? Well, water extinguishes fire, so it sounds like maybe the water should be the correct ones, and the fire have chosen the wrong choice. Of course, we know both are wrong, but
the fire gets rid of the water.
That's also true. That's also true. But you see that they're both wrong. But the Gemara interestingly chooses this side. It says, "V'yafal pisha yoidim," even though they know shehamayim mechabenes ha'esh, that the water extinguishes the fire. So water extinguishes fire, and nevertheless, loy heimiru eloi kehem, or eloi hehem. They didn't exchange their gods, but my nation, heimer kavoidai, it transferred it. It traded its glory below yoyo for something that has zero benefit. So in other words, when a yid sins, it's much different than a guy. A guy, they don't even change their idols, even though they're not even gods, because they don't work and they're wrong, and they choose to worship fire, and then really water puts out fire. But nevertheless, they still keep on with their gods. And by my nation, who they had, me, and I am the source of living water, they switched. They not only they left me, but then they choose something that doesn't even work. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, there's a medrash that that Nimrod told Abraham, "Let us worship fire," and Abraham said, "But water extinguishes fires." And Nimrod says, "Okay, let's worship water." And Abraham says, "But clouds bear water." Nimrod says, "So let's worship clouds." Abraham says, "But when the surges go," Nimrod says, "So when so on and so forth," and that Nimrod got totally frustrated by Abraham.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, so this is the explanation of this verse, of this pasuk in Yirmiyah, that I guess now that Rav Nachman was with Rav Yitzchok, he decided to ask him all the questions that he had on different psukim and other challenging things that were bothering Rav Nachman. So he asked Rav Yitzchok. Rav Yitzchok seems to have all these teachings from Rav Yochanan, and he explained this verse. And that's the meaning of the two. The two means that it's just one sin that's equal to two because of the severity of it, and that's the explanation. So V'amalei Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchok. So now Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchok another question. My dechsiv vayihi kasher zakein Shmuel, and it was when Shmuel became old. The Gemara asks, Siv Shmuel Kulayai? Did Shmuel really get so old? He was 52 when he passed away. So he never got old. So what does the pasuk mean when he got old? The Amar Mar, because Master said or taught in a brisa that he passed away 52 years old. Zehu misase shel Shmuel Haramasi. This is the passing of Shmuel Haramasi. So, what does it mean that that he when he got old? That's the question. The brisa where this is from is a brisa where it talks about if a person dies, person passes away at the age of 50, the brisa says he must have been deserving of the kares punishment. The kares, and one who dies at the age of 52, this is not kares. It was not deserving of being cut off, because this is when Shmuel passed away. So the commentaries talk about how we calculate that Shmuel was 52. Tosfos over here on the side has a whole lot, two explanations actually of how Shmuel was, how we know his age. He was born. He was born when his mother came to the Mishkan in Shiloh, and Eli was there. He had just became when she conceived, when Eli had just been appointed as Kohen Gadol. Eli lasted 40 years, and Shmuel anointed Shaul. It was 10 years before he anointed Shaul. He was 2 years old when he was brought to Eli. Ultimately, it comes out to 52. If you calculate the 40 years and the 10 years and the 2 years before he was brought to the Mishkan, and then he has a whole other another calculation about until David HaMelech was king and so on. But ultimately, the calculation ends up that Shmuel was 52 when he passed away. So the Gemara is asking. So Nachman is asking Rabbi Yitzchok, how is it possible that why is it called that he got old when he didn't get old? So Amar Lei Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is where Rabbi Yochanan says, Zikna Kapta Olav, that old age came upon him in a way that he, even before he reached the age of old age, he looked old, he felt old. The Chsiv, as it says, Nichamti. Why did he get old early, prematurely? Because it says, Nichamti, I regret, ki hamlachti as Shaul, that I anointed Shaul, and because Shaul disobeyed the commandment with regard to Amalek, and was still suffering from it today. If only Shaul wiped out Amalek, we wouldn't have these evil people in the world. And so Shaul made that mistake, and it was a big regret. Hashem wanted to kill him. Hashem regretted. He wanted to kill Shaul right away. So Amar Lefanav. So Shmuel said before Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe, Shekaltani K'Moshe v'Aaron. You made me equal to Moshe and Aaron, as it says in Tehillim, Moshe v'Aaron b'Chayanav. Moshe and Aaron were among his priests. Ushmuel b'Karei Shemai, and Shmuel was among those who invoke his name. So, Ma Moshe v'Aaron, like Batlu Maaseh Yedehem b'Chayei, just like Moshe and Aaron's handiwork did not get destroyed in their lifetime. Meaning, who was Moshe and Aaron's student? Yeshua. And he did not die in the time of Moshe and the time of Moshe and Aaron. Joshua lived after Aaron passed away, and then after Moshe passed away, continued living. So just like them, their handiwork, their success, mute everyone here, their success lasted throughout their lives and afterwards. So the same thing Shmuel said for me. By me also, that my handiwork should not come to naught in my lifetime. That means that Shaul should not be killed before I get killed, before I die. So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem said, "Okay, you put in a good request. Well, what should I do? What should I do? Limay Shaul, to kill Shaul, like Hashavik Shmuel. Shmuel doesn't let. Limay Shmuel, but for Shmuel to die ad zutter at a young age, so Meranini Abbasrei, people are going to say, oh, maybe he did something wrong. That's why he passed away. People might speak, gossip about him. So yes, okay.
Rabbi Azariah, whose hair was white, and it was symbolic of being having wisdom. It was just. I mean, is there a similar situation?
Yeah, there is a discussion about Elazar ben Azariah, but maybe we'll get. We're not going to get into it now, but maybe tomorrow I'll bring it in. So Shmuel Hashem can't let Shmuel die first now because Limay Shmuel he's young, and Meranan and Abbasrei, they're going to talk about him. If I don't have Shaul pass away or Shmuel pass away, Vahigia Malchus David, the kingdom of David has already arrived, meaning the time for the kingdom of David to come. I mean, it was crazy how long David's kingdom kept on getting pushed off. It was for 7 years. He was in. It was even after Shaul dies, it keeps on being pushed off. He was running away from Shaul for a long time. So it's a time for him to be king. So be'ein malchus nagas b'chaverta afilu k'maloin nima, and a reign of one king doesn't touch another even by a hairbreadth. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem said, Akbetz olav zikna, I will make Shmuel age prematurely, And by doing this, people won't speak negative about Shmuel, and he will die. Then Shaul will pass away afterwards. In this way, it won't be that Shmuel's success passes away before him. Hainu d'chsiv Shaul yoshev begiva tachas ha'eshel berama, and this is the meaning of this pasuk in Shmuel Aleph, where it says that Shaul was sitting in Giva under the tree in Ramah. What does that mean? How could he be sitting in one city, but under a tree of another city? In Giva, it's Ramah. What is the connection between Giva and Ramah? They're actually in two different tribes here, tribal areas, and so they're not close to each other. So the Gemara says, this comes to teach you, Mi garam Shaul sheyeshiv begiva, who caused Shaul to dwell in Giva, and what caused him to dwell there? Shtei shanim umechta, 2.5 years. Tfilasei shal Shmuel harimasi. In other words, what gave him the ability to continue was the prayer of Shmuel harimasi, and because otherwise Hashem would have killed Shaul earlier, and right shortly after he became king. But because of Shmuel's prayer, so that's what let Shaul live for that extra 2.5 years. So when it says Shaul was sitting in Giva by the tree in Ramah, means in the merit of the tree in Ramah, meaning in the merit of the tzaddik in Ramah, meaning the Navi Shmuel. So that is the story. But the Gemara is not satisfied. The Gemara says, "Umi midchi gavra makame gavra." Does a person get pushed away because of another person? And Shmuel is going to pass away in order to let David be king? So the Gemara answers in yes. The Amar of Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. Shmuel bar Nachmani says in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, my dechsiv, what does it mean in the pasuk? Al kain chotzavti ben aviyim haragdi beimrei fi. I have dug out by the prophets. Haragdi, I have killed them with the words of my mouth. So it doesn't mean but my say I'm laying them. It's not, they didn't die because of their actions. They did some sins. Rather, Ela be'imrei fi, it means that it's words of my mouth, a divine rule, a decree from heaven, that that's what caused that they should pass away. Alma midchi gavra matame gavra. This shows that a person can sometimes be pushed aside because of another person that is necessary because of the decree of heaven that has been established, that there needs to be the kingdom of David. It caused that Shmuel Hanavi, which is basically Shmuel's fault, sort of, because Shmuel said that he doesn't want Shaul to pass away. So it ended until he passes away. It sort of caused that Shmuel had to pass away first, and then ultimately Shaul could pass away, and then David HaMelech's kingdom could be established. So the next Gemara is a very famous Gemara, and talks about the law of not talking while you're eating. Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchok, Havi Yosvi Besudasa. Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchok were sitting at a meal. Amalei Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchok. So Rav Nachman told Rav Yitzchok, Lemer Mar Milsa. let master say a good word, some Torah. Amar lei, so Rabbi Yitzchok answered him back. Achi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Ein masichin b'suda. Rabbi Yochanan said, you're not supposed to talk during a meal. Shema yaktim kana leveshet, lest the windpipe come before the food pipe. What does that mean? That the food will fall down the windpipe before it goes into the esophagus, where the food is supposed to go. It'll first go to the windpipe, and then it could cause it'll cause a person to come into danger that they possibly will die because the food went down the wrong pipe, and they will cough and could have a danger, like a loss. It could cause the person to die. So the Gemara says basar desod, but after they finished eating, Amar lei. So Rav Yitzchok then said the Dvar Torah. So first he asked Rav Yitzchok to say it during the meal. He said no, can't. We're not allowed to speak. But after he finished, he said, "This is what Rabbi Yochanan said." It says a very interesting thing. Rabbi Yochanan, Yaakov Avinu loimes. Yaakov, our father, did not pass away. That's his Dvar Torah. Jacob never died. So Amar Lei, so Rav Nachman asked him back. He says, "V'chi b'chdi, was it for nothing? Softu sifdaya, safdanaya. That was it for nothing that the eulogers eulogized him. V'chontu chanitaya, and the embalmers embalmed him. V'kavru kavraya, the buriers buried him. Was it for nothing that they did this whole thing? He didn't die." Yes.
You talk about the embalmers embalmed him. Isn't that a usher? I mean, it's not.
The understanding is that it's not the translation of embalming of today. It means that they poured spice over his body, different spices. So it's a different meaning. But so Amar Lei, so Yitzchok said to Rav Nachman, Mikra ni dairish. He says, I'm darshaning a verse. I'm expounding on a verse. So you're asking good questions, but I'm bringing proof from a verse. And what is my proof? The verse says what it leaves out. Ve'ata al tira abdi Yaakov ne'om Hashem. And the pasuk says, and you do not fear my servant Yaakov, says Hashem. V'al techas Yisrael, and don't be broken, Israel. Ki hineni Moshiach me'rachai. I will save you, redeem you from afar. Deliver you or save you from afar. As zaracha me'eretz shivyam, and I will deliver your seed, your children, from the land of their captivity. So, what does it mean? I will save you. It says, I will save you and your children. Marcheshvan lazarai. So it says that it compares, puts them together, that Yaakov and his children, that just like Mazare B'chayim, just like the children of Yaakov, it's mentioned, it's talking about them living, so also Afhu B'chayim, that Yaakov also is living at that time. How could it be he's living at that time? He's alive. He did never die. Taisva says that this is also hinted in the verse because it leaves out, that doesn't say the word vayomais, that he it doesn't say like by all other people. It just says vayigva. It doesn't say vayomais. A lot of whenever it talks about someone passing away in the Chumash, it says vayomais. So it sort of like leaves out the it leaves out death when it talks about Yaakov Avinu. So Taisa says it fits mashma from the verse that he didn't really pass away. So this is a very surprising Gemara. I mentioned that it's popular. So of course it's popular because it has to do with tzaddikim. Do they really pass away? Are they still alive? It's discussed at length in many Svarim, and there's other stories as well similar to this. There's a story about Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the author of the Mishnah, that the Gemara mentions that he would come after he passed away. He would come back to his house every week, every Shabbos, to make kiddush for his family, which is the same idea that not only he didn't pass away, but he was even in some level physically alive because he was able to be mitzi, to have them in mind for kiddush. Now, someone in the next world can't fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush for you. So, so there's reason to say that when it says that the Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he's still alive, it means, in some sense, it means literally. Many people use this that want to say that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is still alive, and they use that as a source. You see, the Gemara has stories about Rabbeinu HaKadosh, leader of Klal Yisrael, that he passed away, but he's still he's still there. But we all believe to some extent that that the soul doesn't die. We know that the neshama of every yid is that way in a certain sense. The question is, physically, is it like how physical does that mean? And our Gemara, what does it mean that Yaakov didn't die? So his neshama, of course, his neshama. His neshama is for sure. Every yid is enjoying Gan Eden. The neshama never dies. The neshama goes to Gan Eden. It might go through some cleansing, whatever, but it goes to Gan Eden. And so when the Gemara says about these special people that they didn't die, it does mean like more. It seems to mean more to some type of physical level, like in the grave. I mean, there's definitely some level by the grave that the neshama is definitely listening to us at the grave, the level of neshama. But there's some connection. There must be some connection to more life, I guess, about Yaakov than what does it mean? Yaakov did die. Everyone doesn't die. Our neshamas are alive, but there must be some level that's more alive by these tzaddikim, that they're more connected to the world in some sense, and especially with Rabbeinu HaKadosh, very hard to explain, but he was able to make kiddush for his family. I mean, it means it's some physical level that he was alive. Yes, Isaac.
I was, in terms of getting beyond this physical business, I mean, I wouldn't say pshat, but I would say Avraham had Esav and Yitzchok. So there was something negative that came out of it. Had Yishmael and Yitzchok. Yitzchok had Esav and Yaakov. Yaakov was the first one, all of whose issue were pure, that were tamim also. So when you say Yaakov didn't die in terms of perpetuating the Am Hashem, the Avdus that we do and continued on, that could be a way of, it's interesting that nobody talks about it much more. When they said Yaakov Avinu Lomes, nobody in that group said anything in response.
You would think you think Rav Nachman would not be
but somebody,
be right. But we don't know how many other people were there. It could be it was just Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchok. They were sitting at a suda. Okay,
right.
Maybe
so it's quoted. If they're quoting this, then what I'm saying, unless it's a statement more of.
No, you're right. They should have asked more questions for sure. It's like, what does this mean?
Or added to it. Usually somebody adds to it. Not only that, but this. Or somebody says, but what about, but nothing. So, I don't know.
I mean, the commentaries. There are commentaries that the later commentaries try to, try to give some explanation here.
So I'm also a later commentary. I'm just saying, trying to understand.
It is surprising that they didn't explain it better, explain it more. These are the secrets of the Torah. These are the homiletics. These are secrets. So I guess maybe they did have more, and they're not sharing it with us. Maybe that's. But the later commentaries do have a little.
I'm just saying to get past the physical questions of, did he really die? Or, like you say, the neshama, nobody dies really.
Right. So it must be something more than that. Anyway, we're going to conclude here. Zeitgesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Can I mention one thing?
Yeah.
What about